Well, that was a frustrating hour of everything I was trying to do going completely wrong. All right, so I guess this is the update for day two, starting in on the process of creating the games. So let's see if we can. I guess we'll plot and plan some of this live because I didn't get to it in time to really get ahead of myself here. So pulling up some files. Yeah, my computer crashed this afternoon. And I've been chasing down, trying to figure out what caused it and trying to fix it. And that's an obnoxious process. Epic Game Designs. Okay. Oh, okay. So I got a list of a bunch of weird notions that have appeared in my brain at random intervals. One of them is just literally the title, "Oh Oh Baby." It's Baby James Bond mashup. So it's like a baby that's a super spy, and it's "Oh Oh Baby." Oh God. Oh, I think my brain is broken. And won't do that one this time because that requires a little more tinkering. Casual game one and two. Some cyberpunk themed ones. Captain Mr. Space Ninja and its subsequent sequels. And uh, one based off of my webcomic, the one I came up with back in high school. Some variants on board games brought to the computer that I could probably try for. I don't think I'm going for that one. Types of games that exist. Navigator Gauntlet, Frag the Foe, Story Game, Epic Saga, Economy Puzzle, Time Rush, Deck Builder, Area Control, Worker Placement, Roll and Move, Secret Identity, Party Game. I'm kind of curious to see how party games would translate over into a virtual multiplayer. I don't think I have the capabilities of doing a multiplayer with what I'm doing right now. Um, there's board game styles here. So platform, shooter, fighter, brawler, stealth, survival. Survival games seem like kind of fun. Um, rhythm, keep, adventure. I have a couple examples of existing games in each of those formats. And subcategories and subgenres. I have one here marked as an urban fantasy idea, but it's an idle game where it's really more about being in a hidden fairy black market, sort of in the way that for Harry Potter you have to go through that train platform. What is it, 9.5 or something like that? 9 3/4. And if you find your way into that pay black market, then it's sort of like trade and exchange. It's an economy sort of um, idle game, a clicker game. I don't know that that's where I want to go just yet. Oh, and an idea for a hacker game that is somewhere in the range of an idle game, but not quite. Oh, an idle game where you create a self-help empire by giving 110% affiliate marketing, seminars, and ebook publishing. And that's sort of me just taking a swing at that kind of stuff. Just how absurd. I think I was just watching something earlier today when I was catching up on some news about what was that? That guy who did his Ferrari in his garage thing, and how he's just like a self-help guru who's moved into the you know coaching people to make money online, and like all the methods they use to coach are just like how to make click funnels, and just like they don't actually make anything other than paths for your money to flow into their pocket. Um, so I'm, I'm a little snarky when it comes to talking about that kind of stuff. So I can be a bit of uh, I guess I can be a little bit of a jerk about it. But I think it would be funny to do and make a game that just makes fun of that whole genre of instant millionaire program stuff. Okay, action. So platformer games like Joust, Bubble Bobble, and Mario. Shooters like first-person shooters or third-person like Fortnite. Fighter like Mortal Kombat. Brawler like Renegade, X-Men, or Ninja Turtles arcade games. Stealth I don't have an example for. Survival. Survival games would be like Five Nights at Freddy's. Rhythm. Keep the beat. I guess to a certain degree, like Guitar Hero or something like that. And that's action games. Adventure games would be like Castlevania, Metroid, Legend of Zelda. There's also visual novels like Ace Attorney, which I guess falls under adventure. Cinematic like The Last of Us. And then there's text adventures. Now, there's a game I remember from when I was younger called Space Quest. And it was snarky, and it was dorky, and it was kind of fun. I don't know that that's something I want to. Well, maybe. I might be able to combine like a Space Quest style game with a Five Nights at Freddy's survival theme. I don't know. That seems like it would be a lot of work to mash those two up to get them to work right. Party games, board games, idle games, art games. Oh, so I marked under art games. Some of this might be my own categorization. Some of it's based off of what other people would categorize things as. But art games would be like The Beginner's Guide or The Stanley Parable, in which, like, for the most part, you're just following like especially with the beginner's guide, there isn't you can't die and you can't really lose. There is no losing scenario. You can wander aimlessly for long periods of time until you figure out what you need to figure out. But it's for the most part, it's almost like a labyrinth where there are no false paths. So you're just traveling the path, gets you from the entrance to the exit or the center, and then the center back out. And the satisfaction from that type of game is more about um, the story that's being told during that trip, learning more. Now, Stanley Parable does have alternate ways of ending the story. You can get different endings. But I don't think, if I remember correctly, I don't think there's a way to be wrong in Stanley Parable. Like, you can take a bunch of different paths, and they all finish up with a sort of a different ending. They don't all. I mean, sometimes you cycle back through and you start over and you go back through and take a different path this time and get a different end result. I think there's something like 16 different ends. And so that's a possibility. Idle games, art games, collecting games like Pokemon, where you got to get them all. Builder games like SimCity, Farmville kind of games, puzzle games, RPG, so Final Fantasy, Dragon Warrior, Pool of Radiance, roguelike. Um, roguelike is roughly an RPG in my mind. It's missing some of that aspect. Sports, so racing, team sport games, and then war games. I have like StarCraft and Warcraft, like the original games, not like World of Warcraft. Masters of Orion, tower defense games. And then there's like the different generations of games are like the fixed screen. So you have arcade games like Asteroids, where you're fixed in the center and things come in from the edges and you fire on the asteroids. There is a version of like a shareware game I played when I was younger where you could move your ship from the center. The screen stayed and your ship would wrap depending on which direction it went through. So if it went up, it would come back up through the bottom. So that's fixed screen. What was flip screen? I think it's sort of like that, where you have a fixed screen, you go to the edge, and it flips over to the next one. Now, then after that there was side scrollers, which was continuous, like the Super Mario, where you're continuously tracking the movement of the character. Free roaming is more of a you can go in every direction. Side scroller was pretty much universally just left to right. If you jumped up to higher levels, it didn't pan up too much with you. So free roaming is three-dimensional. Well, it's pseudo three-dimensional. It didn't really get going on the z-axis. You had the x and the y. X, Y, Z. And then that was the next phase, which was 3D. And then turn-based, top-down games. And so I've been sort of for a while sort of trying to build a sort of a survey of different types of games, like the type of gameplay versus the visual design aspects of the game versus the mechanism of entertainment. And so, like, by taking it and breaking it into three parts, like what's the body of the game, the soul of the game, and the spirit of the game. Take a little bit of the old alchemy terminology, the salt, sulfur, and mercury. Just sort of like making a sort of a list that you can make different games by just picking different ones from different categories and do a adventure collecting game with a side-scroller mechanism on a story-based. Yeah, so just sort of trying to build a means of like randomly draw 3 cards from 3 decks and get the basis for your game idea. Be sort of like a fun challenge. All right, so going back up to my video game concept ideas, I feel like I had more than that though. There's presents. Ooh, oh, baby. I still think that's hilarious. Hello NPC was a weird idea I had. That's more of an art game. That's sort of like a almost a visual novel. Hyper casual style games, which are going to be more like asteroids and side scrollers. I did have an idea for a cyberpunk 8-bit, sort of a side scroller, maybe more of a free roamer. Captain Mr. Space Ninja, and of course Amazon Moon Pirates, Professor Mademoiselle Pirate Ninja, Babs Adventure, and Venusian Vikings. That's all part of a series. The first one in that series is Captain Mr. Space Ninja. It's weird, no lie. After that series, separate from that series, People of the Clear Waters, which was based off of my webcomic. What I'm roughly titling Slime Boy was the idea I had when I was in high school. It has me thinking now. It's funny because I've written a story where you could just as easily call the character there Slime Boy too, and it might be kind of fun to do. So for what I'm looking at right now is coming up with the story ideas for 2 games. One's a sort of RPG, and one is a more of a side scroller, something like a side scroller, I think. So, like the RPG, I do have some old favorite games that I would love to reproduce as an RPG, but it's also possible I could do a story similar to my Slime Boy story, not my Slime Boy game. The Slime Boy story that I was working on. That's not what I called it when I wrote it, but that could be what I call the game. And the basic premise of that is you start out as a teenage boy in a city where superheroes happen all over the place. And there are enough of these origin events that happen within the city that it's just accepted as a common hazard, like potholes almost. And so, like, it's just as likely that you'll encounter something that'll turn you into a monster that'll wreck the city and you have to be stopped by a superhero, as it is that you will find something that turns you into a superhero. So, with that in mind, there's sort of a jumpy, scaredy cat nature to the main character, and it's the story of their origin as a superhero slash monster. Basically, they encounter something that the people of the city oftentimes warn their kids to be safe because you never know if you're going to encounter something that's going to turn you into a monster, and so the kids are always super cautious about that. Um, but there's always that hopefulness that they'll encounter something that gives them powers to become a superhero. And you think of it in this like dichotomy, like you're either a hero or you're a monster, and those are things like real hazards that happen every day in your city. Um, and so you can be a very scared, jumpy individual, worried that you're going to get turned into a monster, and you encounter something that sort of makes you a monster, but you're still you, and you're not destroying things. You're deformed and sort of like a little less bizarre. Well, maybe not as less bizarre, but a different type of toxic Avenger from Tromaville Pictures, where somebody is mutated into something terrible, but they're a heroic monster. And so, like, you could play a game like that and make a role playing game like that where you build a city and populate it full of average, everyday people, monsters, and superheroes. And your character's origin story is them becoming something they're not sure which side of that spectrum they're on and how they relate to everybody else in that game. And then, so that's a possibility for doing the role playing game. That could be kind of funny. That could be a fun way to play that. Turned into a slime person and able to squeeze through the smallest openings and survive impact damage because it just doesn't hurt you, or maybe even cutting and slashing damage, but like fire damage hurts you more than other things. So there's just some of that you could play at. Um, how tongue in cheek to make it? That's a good question. Because like one of the other games I want to build is a game I'm calling. It's the game that I came up with when prompted for presents, and that's also a superhero based idea. So that paint smears on me from painting the other day. Um, so that's also a superhero setting. That one's much more serious. And if I wanted to do multiple games of overlapping superhero storylines and characters, I'd want to build it in such a way that like the Slime Boy game isn't so goofy that the setting can't take the serious character either. I want them to potentially both be in that setting. So the comedic aspect of Slime Boy would have to be on the absurdity of his own situation and his own mind and thought processes. Um, and I mean, you can have him end up with arch nemesis who's a goofball, possibly literally have a stupid villain or villainous hero whose name is Goofball, and he's got the ability to inflate into a bouncy ball and ricochet around. Um, like, but if you get too goofy with that, it ruins the setting for anything more serious. Now, I don't have to make it so that it mixes with other game designs that I have in mind, but like I have a tendency to go that route. Like I like building worlds and I like building character stories that when mixed with other characters that I've created build a broader world. So if I want to plan that one out, I'm gonna have to figure out see if I can figure out a way to um, have a lighthearted, comedic superhero story in a serious superhero world. So it can't be like a city that's like a it can't be like Futurama for superheroes as a setting if I'm going to then end up having a serious, somewhat tragic hero story set in that same space. It wouldn't fit well. So like I may have to tame down the comedic side of Slime Boy, tame down the dark seriousness of uh, Presence. All right, so that's I think I'm going to dabble a little bit with Slime Boy as a game design idea for a role playing game and see if RPG Maker enables me to make a decent game of superhero. A lot of RPG game design aspects are built around the premise of doing um, fantasy. So castles and caverns and dragons and monsters. I could customize some of the art and do distinctly like Metropolis or Gotham style city structure instead of castles and forests. It does make a steeper curve for development because I'm going to have to build an entire suite of artwork for it. I'll think about it. And then the other gameplay I was going to work at was a more conventional side scroller, or trying to think of other games that were like this, like a Mega Man style game, which is more of a platformer, I think. So I need to think of a like what was I looking at the story premise stuff? Oh, a survival game and a collecting game. So what am I surviving? Like there's zombie apocalypse kind of game. That, that doesn't feel quite right. There's sort of like a weakness to the like it's it's done too much, and I think the other problem I have with that type of game is it's it's hard for me to get into any zombie movies or TV series or any of those kinds of things just because like it's a dead body. Like a hot August day is its greatest enemy. It's going to just rot away. Now, The Last of Us did an interesting spin on that, but like zombies, they're shambling, mindless, barely mobile. Like you might as well have a game where your enemies are inanimate objects. Like all you have to do is just get to a place where they can't roll down the hill towards you, kind of thing. It's just that's a weak story element for me. Um, I don't do a lot of horror stuff, and survival games tend to be. Oh, ooh, no, okay. Yeah, survival games tend to be either um, being under siege. So you could do something like a terrorist attack, But that's not the kind of game you want to make. You make no friends that way. That is not something to make a game out of. Um, and so that leaves sort of like supernatural horror fiction. That reminds me, I did have sort of like the way I was breaking down games into sort of like a list of um, pieces that you could assemble into a different type of game. I was breaking down different types of fiction. So we had horror, ghost stories, monster literature, thriller, weird fiction, dark fantasy, cosmic horror, and splatterpunk. Gothic novel kind of fits sort of there. Um, Fantasy would be like steampunk, Lord of the Rings, fairy tale, folklore. Urban fantasy, contemporary fantasy like Harry Potter, which is distinct from urban fantasy. Sword and sorcery, fantasy of manners, which is a weird category. Um, High fantasy, low fantasy, science fiction had science fiction, science fantasy, cyberpunk, hard sci-fi, soft sci-fi, space opera, alternate history. Adventure would be action novels, um, pulp, superhero, epic adventure, imaginary voyage, lost world, Elysian tale, picaresque novel, apocalyptic sea story, subterranean fiction. I don't know what I should do. Like, if I do a side scroller, I don't have to do a survival game. Um, I could do a collecting game. Uh, do a romance game. That would be a new one, as far as I know. I've seen a lot of that kind of thing. Not that that's particularly my forte. I don't know that I'd be particularly good at that. Crime detective novels. Whodunit, courtroom drama, hardboiled fiction. No, it might be. Oh, that might be more of a role playing style game. Because, like, I was thinking, like, it might be kind of fun to do a private detective side scroller, but that's harder to do. That's a little bit more of a, like, there's story. And side scrollers and platformers and um, simpler games, they're they may have a simple story to them, like an overarching story of like the evil dragon stole the princess and you have to rescue the princess and you have to go through various kingdoms of uh, the invading monsters to rescue her. Um, that's Super Mario for anybody who didn't get that. Um, but like that's literally the whole story. The whole game is just that story. Save the princess from the dragon. Now, doing something like a detective side scroller, it can be done like a platformer or a side scroller game in the style of like a Mega Man uh, type of game. But uh, you're uncovering clues towards solving a given mystery. You could do that. And some of the story aspects of the follow-ups to Captain Mr. Space Ninja do use that format. They take the idea of using a character trying to figure out how or where somebody is and uncover a story as they gradually go, getting clues and things that enable them to go further. That's it's sort of taking that detective uh, problem solving story arc. It's still not a story game, which is what's best suited for a whodunit detective novel. Courtroom drama, no. Hardboiled fiction, which is that private eye style. Mystery fiction, you can do something like a Sherlock Holmesian kind of story. Inspirational stories. Oof, that's a sticky wicket. That's sort of more of a um, faith-based or life lessons or overcoming trauma or personal struggle. Um, it's not. It's not. The game format isn't the best way to do that. Like I'm sure I could come up with. I could brainstorm up a game that is sort of like a practice session for learning skills to overcome your struggles and trauma. And that's not a bad idea to make a game like that. I think it's too big a scope and too serious a topic to do in this week or so that I'm going to be doing this. I could do a Western style game. So, like Mountain Men, Outlaws, Settlers, and Lawmen style games. Satire game, children's books, literary fiction. So, social commentary with political criticisms or reflections of human condition. There's a lot to maybe unpack in some of those potential ideas. Oh, I don't know what I need to do for this. This will be tricky. I mean, my brain really is hooked on cyberpunk right now for concepts. So, like, it's hard not to let myself keep falling back in that direction. I don't want to. I don't want everything I do in the first quarter of this year to be cyberpunk in one format or another. So the RPG would be a superhero style game, which sort of falls under fantasy. Science fiction? I don't know. That's a tricky one. Yeah, I think it falls under contemporary fantasy more than anything. Or pulp. It might be under adventure category of pulp. Yeah, I think that's actually where I got it. Yeah, that's where I placed it. But that's the funny thing about a lot of this stuff. It's very intermixable. All right, so thinking back on the survival style game. Okay, things to be scared of. Dolls, clowns, creepy children, dead bodies, computers, mirrors, trains. Trains is hard to be scared of. Computers start moving into the cyberpunk or stuff like that. Weapons, machines, electronics, hackers, again, AI, get too far into the cyberpunk territory, I think. Dolls, clowns, creepy children, dead bodies. Dead bodies is zombies. or vampires, or some other form of undead, mummies, all of that. Okay, some story ideas I had. This sort of annoys me because I have two ideas here, or I have a few ideas here that were based off of horror fiction concepts that I came up with based off of human senses. So, like being in a situation where you can't use a certain sense or a sense is a danger to you. And so, like the first one is silence or sounds being dangerous or deadly. And the other one was sight or light, so dark, pitch darkness, or seeing something. And so, like those two movies that came out, what is it, Bird Box, and the other one where you can't make it out, Hush, I guess it was. So those are like they're derivative now, despite the fact that I came up with them before those movies existed. Uh, being alone as a fear. Like these are fears, but they're not necessarily survival aspects. Claustrophobia, heights, um, being afraid of sleep was a weird one. That might not be a bad one to do for the detective story. Because for me, what I have here is every time you fall asleep, something takes over your body and does things. You wake up in a new place with things changed around you. And so every day is sort of like trying to uncover what was done while you were gone. That could be a fun game to work on at some point. So that's sleep, dreams, being buried alive. Ooh, now that's a hard game to do. Like I was working on writing a story for that one that's really well fleshed out. It doesn't translate well to game design. Not currently. I could probably bend it a little bit to make it work, but it would be a really unconventional style game. It's almost better as a text game. So falling as a fear, getting tied up, open space, light as a fear. That would be an interesting visual game where all the characters were done as dark splotches and some form of light is being introduced into your area and it's dangerous to you all, and you have to find ways to break light bulbs or mirrors that are reflecting light into your space. Parasites, germs, disease, hospitals, medications, surgeries, needles, poisons, and aging are all classic phobias. Witches and books and water. Fear of water is a weird one. I have to admit that. Fire, dirt, wind, animals, so snakes, spiders, bats, bees, mice, rats, ants, and ravens. That's a series of books I was thinking of doing. Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, like, survival game, like, how serious do you want to take it? And how do you want to play it? Do you want to do a more arcade style game where you're set at a pace of moving forward no matter what you do, and you just move back and forth and try to avoid colliding with objects? That's like the super simplest version of a game you can do. Um, like if you do something reverse of that, where you start at the top of the screen, middle of the screen, and it's moving you forward at a regular advancement rate, and you're trying to avoid something that's that could possibly catch you. So, no, that's a possibility. Like a survival game where you're trying to run away from something rather than attack into something. Um, what would you be running from, though? Combine a bunch of these things, and so it's like creepy clown dolls with um, scalpels and needles and uh, vials full of poisons. I don't know. That's sort of pushing it. Um, computers, mirrors. I wonder if doing a no, that's more of an RPG. I keep falling back on the RPG models. It's just the storyline concept of those that really appeals to me. Was I was thinking like mirrors might be fun one to do, where you have to go into the mirror realm through different mirrors around a house and examine the internals of those mirrors for hidden clues that aren't in the real world to solving a mystery. But that's more of an RPG and not a platformer style game. A platformer collecting game seems like the best format for that, the simpler game. And so, what am I going to do for the premise, the story premise of my platformer game? So, platformer collecting. So, genres of fiction. Go back, like I still sort of favor science fictiony stuff. Um, platformer collecting game was collecting the Infinity Stones. Uh, no, I mean you could do like a Ready Player One style thing too, where you have three different challenges that you have to complete, and each one unlocks a a key, And when you have all three keys, you get the grand prize. Ooh. But I don't feel like that's the right way to go with that. Um, like I still keep wanting to go back on that story with the fear of sleep. Every time you fall asleep, somebody else takes over your body and does things. When you wake up, you have to figure out what's going on. And that mirror game it's a fun idea. It's just not fit for the styles that I'm making right now. Like that, yeah, that's not what I'm making right now. Uh, I had an idea earlier I was messing around with where taking a new twist on the zombie survival game, where instead of being the person in the zombie apocalypse avoiding the zombies, you're actually a zombie. You play a zombie trying to get brains. And the survival aspect of that game is trying to make sure you don't get your head blown off by the people trying to survive. Um, you need to get food, so you need to eat brains at a certain amount of regular time, and you need to not be killed by the people that you're trying to eat. Like that's a funny, goofy game design. Um, could I do that as a platformer game? So I might be able to make that work. That might be my game design. You play a zombie that you you wake up as the undead in the zombie apocalypse, and there are all these fleeing civilians. Instead of monsters, like in Super Mario, you're the plumber. I don't know why you're a plumber running through a realm through of mushroom people with dragons as opponents. I don't understand that, but it doesn't matter. Dragons and turtles and all that weird garbage. Um, you have your main character running through these environments, encountering these Koopas and whatevers, and jumping on them to obliterate them or whatever you're doing to them. Uh, so instead of monsters that you're fighting, you are the monster hunting other human beings. And so instead of being monsters, they're humans. And like they can hurt you by hitting you with crowbars or whatever. And if they get a hold of a gun, they're more dangerous. So like the bosses will be the ones that have guns or something that can kill you. Um, your power ups can be like a bulletproof helmet, so they can't shoot your head off. And to make it easier to get your brains from your potential victims, uh, to get like a bone saw or something to get through their skulls easier, or just hit them with a hammer. Um, oh, that would be such a weird game. Oh, that would be kind of fun to make. I think that's what I'm going to end up doing. It doesn't need a greater storyline than that. You are a zombie. Your motivation is brains. Your enemies are humans. Your power-ups are hammers and bulletproof helmets and stuff like that. Ah, this is sort of perfect. Um, Now whether or not I'm gonna do this as a, like, side scroller, platformer, or, free moving style game, free range. It's not gonna be a 3D. I don't have the ability to do a 3D game of any real quality right now. But, okay, I think I've got my 2 game ideas roughed out. Um, I guess my side scroller platformer zombie survival game is, easy enough to get started with pretty quickly. The RPG Slime Boy, that might be a little more tricky. Like, I have to have, like, generic villains, like bank robbers and, gangs with jetpacks or something like that, as, like, the generic baddies, the Koopas or, low-level monsters, but as you get further into it, you're gonna encounter, like, campy supervillains or superheroes that take themselves too seriously and see you as a villain because you're a monster, not a hero, as far as they can see. That has the potential to get very serious, and I'll have to really sit down and do some scripting. There might be a happy balance I can pull off where the character and some of the situations can be very comedic, but the setting can be thoughtful, and the world building can enable later stories to be more serious in it. I'll have to think about that one. That one could be interesting. So, zombie survival game and, um, Slime Boy. Those are my games. I think that's the 2 games I'm gonna play with. Zombie survival, just a matter of building, different sections of or different buildings or different, city streets, uh, as the different frames of doing that. And I can keep it running as a roughly, indefinite gameplay, uh, because, like, there's no story end. Like, there's like, the goal of the character is to continually be able to eat brains. It's you've never solved the major problem of the game at any point. You never have a point where, like, "Well, I've had brains now, I don't have to do that anymore." So, it's sort of like you can continue and see how far you can get before you die, and that's sort of a relatively easy way to do a game like that. Think that's where I'm going with that one. You don't do a lot of jumping as a zombie. Or, well, I guess you can do jumping. I think, though, I like the shambling zombie type, not the running, shrieking, tear you to pieces kind. Um, I got to figure out what the attacks and the movement of the zombie are. I'll think about that, yeah. And there's not like a Yoshi type of character for a zombie. I'll think about that some more, and I will see you tomorrow for some of the first thought processes. And I don't know that I'll have anything demonstratable about what I'm working on, but I can share where I am in the process, I guess. So I will see you tomorrow.